The wind whispered across the wide Kansas plains, bending tall grass around a forgotten piece of land where an abandoned well sat hidden behind rusting barbed wire. Its stone walls crumbled from decades of neglect, and rainwater pooled in its depths. Locals avoided it, calling the place cursed, a reminder of accidents from another era. But one evening, something stirred inside. Scratching paws echoed from within, followed by a sharp bark that shattered the silence of the empty farmland. Before we dive into this story, don't forget to subscribe for more true, gripping stories that reveal how courage and loyalty can change lives. Officer Michael Harris knew these lands better than most. In his 40s, his uniform carried the wear of long service, yet his eyes revealed the persistence of a man unwilling to give up on anyone. Standing tall but carrying a quiet humility, he had built his reputation not from glory, but from showing up, day after day, for people who needed him. His closest partner was not another officer, but Ranger, a German shepherd whose sharp instincts and fierce loyalty had saved lives more than once. Together, they patrolled small towns where everyone knew each other's names, a place where fear had recently stolen the comfort of routine. Over the last month, Michael had watched hope unravel. 14 children had gone missing across the county. At first, people believed the cases were unrelated. A teenager who never came home from basketball practice, a girl who disappeared while walking back from the library, siblings who vanished after a church picnic. But as days turned into weeks, the truth sank in. Something darker was at work. Parents grew restless, their grief boiling into protests outside the police station. Reporters arrived, their cameras chasing tears and anger, turning the town's suffering into headlines. Michael took each disappearance personally. He had a daughter of his own, Emily, who lived with her mother in another state. Their relationship had grown distant over the years, weighed down by divorce and missed birthdays, yet every missing child's face reminded him of her. When he returned home after long nights, he often sat in silence staring at the phone, wishing he knew what to say to bridge the gap between them. But duty called louder than regret, and Ranger was always there, waiting by the door, ready to search again. That bond was unshakable. Ranger wasn't just trained to detect sense, he had a way of sensing Michael's doubts and pressing on regardless. Where Michael's shoulders slumped under the weight of failure, Ranger's ears stood tall, his sharp gaze urging his partner forward. More than once, townsfolk had remarked that the two seemed to understand each other without words. Michael found comfort in that silent connection, a reminder that he wasn't fighting alone. Still, the weight of unanswered questions crushed him. Despite roadblocks, search parties, and hours spent scouring abandoned barns and empty lots, there were no clues, only growing frustration. Families pleaded for answers, but all Michael could offer was the promise that he wouldn't stop looking. In quiet moments, he wondered if he was lying to them, if his stubborn hope was simply prolonging heartbreak. Yet every morning, he clipped Ranger's leash, stepped out of his patrol truck and told himself the same thing. There has to be something we missed. What neither he nor the community yet knew was that the truth lay buried beneath their feet, hidden in the earth's silence. Ranger's restless nature would soon uncover a secret no one dared imagine, a secret that would turn despair into salvation and redefine what it meant to be a hero. And it all began with a single bark echoing from an abandoned well, a sound that would soon unravel one of the darkest mysteries the county had ever faced. The first disappearance had unsettled the community, but it was the second that transformed unease into panic. A boy named Daniel Whitaker, 13 years old, vanished after leaving basketball practice at the local middle school. His friends remembered him walking toward the parking lot with his backpack slung over one shoulder, but he never arrived home. Parents and volunteers searched every block, shouting his name into the night, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. But by morning, there was still no trace. Within days, another child was gone. Emily Carter, age 11, last seen at the library downtown. Her backpack was found under a bench outside, the straps ripped as if tugged in haste. People whispered about kidnappings, and suddenly no parent allowed their children to walk anywhere alone. The quiet Kansas town, where kids once biked freely between each other's houses, became gripped by suspicion. Neighbors locked doors earlier, and playgrounds sat empty. By the time the 7th and 8th disappearances occurred, the FBI had been called in. Television crews arrived, their vans parked along Main Street. Reporters cornered families, microphones catching trembling voices and tear-stained cheeks. Sheriff Laura McKinney, known for her stern calm, stood on the courthouse steps addressing the press. "We are coordinating with state and federal agencies. Every lead is being investigated. I promise the families that we will not rest until we bring their children home." But behind her composed tone, exhaustion pulled at her features. The sheriff had been awake for days, her desk buried under maps, lists, and photographs. Michael Harris stood beside her at every press conference, though he rarely spoke. He didn't trust the flashing cameras or the way reporters twisted words into sound bites. What mattered to him was the silent pressure in his chest each time he saw Karen Thompson's face among the waiting parents. Karen's son, Adam, had disappeared after a Sunday service at the Baptist church. One moment he was chasing a football in the grass outside, the next he was gone, leaving his mother calling out for him with growing panic. Karen's anguish shook Michael. She had known him since high school, and now her voice cracked when she confronted him outside the station. "You're the one who promised me, Michael. You said no stone would be left unturned." "Where is my boy?" Michael couldn't meet her eyes. "I haven't stopped looking, Karen. Ranger hasn't either. We will find him." Her lips trembled, caught between trust and despair. "I'm holding you to that." Pastor Samuel, a broad-shouldered man with kind but weary eyes, gathered the families in the church basement for nightly vigils. Candles flickered as parents clutched photographs of their missing children, their prayers a mixture of hope and grief. The scent of wax and faint hymns lingered in the air, pressing on Michael's heart when he visited. He wasn't a religious man, but he understood the weight of faith when all else seemed lost. Every evening he studied the case files spread across his kitchen table. Ranger lay at his feet, occasionally lifting his head when Michael groaned in frustration. Each child seemed to vanish under different circumstances, some from town, some from rural roads, some even in broad daylight. No single thread connected them, yet Michael refused to believe they were isolated cases. The townspeople grew restless. At a heated town hall meeting, one man shouted, "What good are the police if our kids are vanishing? Are we supposed to guard our doors with shotguns?" Murmurs of agreement filled the hall. Sheriff McKinney raised her hand, commanding silence. "I know you're scared, I am too, but panic will only make this worse. We need vigilance and cooperation." Michael stood at the back, jaw clenched, watching the fear spread like wildfire. He knew the town expected answers he didn't have yet, but somewhere deep inside, he held on to the certainty that the children were still out there. He could almost feel Ranger's steady presence telling him the same thing. The trail wasn't cold, just hidden. And though the weight of failure threatened to crush him, Michael made a silent vow he would not stop, not until every missing child was brought back. Michael Harris hadn't always trusted dogs. Growing up, his family had lived in a small house where animals were considered a burden rather than companions. His father believed loyalty came only from people, and even that, Michael had learned, was not always true. After serving in the military, though, Michael discovered otherwise. During his deployment overseas, he witnessed how K-9 units saved lives, detecting explosives and finding wounded soldiers in places no human could reach. That was where his respect for dogs began, though it would take years before Ranger entered his life. When Michael joined the county police force after returning from service, he signed up for K-9 training. The day he first met Ranger was unforgettable. The German Shepherd had been the most restless dog in the program, pacing in his cage while other dogs sat quietly. Some handlers thought he was too headstrong, too independent to be reliable, but Michael saw something else in him, determination. "Careful with that one," the trainer had warned. "He's sharp, but he's stubborn. Doesn't listen unless he trusts you." Michael had crouched down near the cage and simply waited, saying nothing. Ranger had barked once, then tilted his head, watching him with piercing brown eyes. It wasn't obedience Michael felt in that moment, but recognition, like the dog was testing whether he was worth following. From then on, they were inseparable. Ranger didn't give his loyalty freely, but when he did, it was absolute. Michael respected that. Their training days were long, filled with drills under scorching sun and biting cold. Ranger learned to track scents across fields, to detect hidden objects, to respond to signals in tense silence. Michael learned patience, learning to trust the dog's instincts, even when they conflicted with human logic. One memory stood out clearly. During a search and rescue exercise in the Colorado mountains, Ranger broke from the expected path, pulling Michael uphill against the orders of the supervising officer. "Call him back, Harris," the officer barked, but Michael hesitated, something inside him whispering to let the dog lead. Minutes later, Ranger found the missing hiker lying unconscious under a fallen tree. From that day on, Michael knew he would never doubt him again. At home, Ranger wasn't simply a working dog. He was Michael's companion in the quiet hours no one else saw. On nights when Michael couldn't sleep, he would sit on the porch with a glass of water while Ranger lay at his feet, ears twitching at every rustle in the grass. In those silences, Michael often spoke without expecting answers. "You think I'm doing enough?" he once murmured, staring at the distant glow of town lights. Ranger turned his head, pressing his nose against Michael's knee as if to say yes. The bond became even more personal when Michael's daughter, Emily, visited one summer. She had been distant, frustrated with the awkwardness of seeing her father after so long apart, but Ranger broke the barrier. Emily had laughed when the dog bounded toward her, tail wagging furiously. By the end of the week, she was brushing his coat and walking him proudly down the street. "Dad," she had said softly before leaving, "Ranger really loves you. I think maybe I get why you love your job so much." Those words lingered with Michael, a rare glimpse of connection with a daughter who often felt just out of reach. Ranger wasn't just bridging the gap between father and daughter. He was reminding Michael of the importance of trust, patience, and unconditional loyalty. Now, as the case of the missing children weighed heavier each day, Michael leaned more than ever on that bond. He trusted Ranger not only to help him find clues, but to steady his own heart when doubt threatened to overwhelm him. And though the town questioned whether the search would ever bring answers, Michael knew that as long as Ranger kept moving forward, so would he. The investigation stretched on like a road with no end, each turn revealing nothing but more emptiness. Michael and Ranger had searched barns where dust hung thick in the air, warehouses littered with rusted machinery, and farmhouses abandoned decades ago. Time after time, Ranger picked up faint scents, traces of strangers passing through, but they dissolved before leading to anything concrete. One bitterly cold morning, Michael knelt beside the dog, his breath clouding in the frosty air. "I know, boy," he whispered as Ranger pawed at another dead trail. "We're chasing ghosts." By then, the community's patience was unraveling. Families who once offered casseroles and words of encouragement to the officers now stood outside the police station, holding signs demanding answers. "Bring our children home" was scrawled across cardboard in thick black paint. Their chants echoed through the small town streets, a mix of sorrow and rage. Michael could hear them even from inside his office, each cry piercing deeper into his conscience. Sheriff McKinney called for a meeting in the cramped conference room at the station. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting tired shadows across her lined face. "We've exhausted every lead," she said flatly, tapping a stack of folders. "The FBI is pressuring us to shift resources elsewhere." Michael leaned forward, hands gripping the table. "We can't walk away. Those kids are still out there." "You don't know that," a county commissioner interrupted, his voice sharp with frustration. "What we do know is that the town is on edge. People are scared. Businesses are suffering. The longer this drags on, the worse it gets. Maybe it's time to face the possibility that they're gone." The words hit Michael like a blow. He looked around the table, searching for a spark of resistance, but saw only weary resignation. Finally, Sheriff McKinney sighed. "Commissioner, with all due respect, until we have evidence, I won't declare them dead. But I need results, Harris. I can't hold this town together with promises." Later that evening, Michael sat alone in the squad car, staring at the steering wheel. His reflection in the windshield looked older than he felt, lines carved deep by sleepless nights. Ranger shifted in the passenger seat, whining softly. Michael reached over, scratching behind his ears. They think it's over, but I can't give up. Not when those parents are still waiting. The weight of failure was crushing. He replayed the vigils, the mothers clutching photos, the fathers pacing like caged animals. He thought of Karen Thompson, her eyes hollow but burning with desperate hope. What would he tell her if the search was abandoned, that the system had given up on her son? The idea made his stomach twist. That night, Michael returned home and collapsed at his kitchen table. Maps and reports spilled across the surface, their lines blurring together in his tired vision. He buried his face in his hands, torn between determination and despair. Ranger padded over, nudging his leg with a cold nose. Michael let out a bitter laugh. "You don't know when to quit, do you?" But beneath his weariness, a quiet fire still burned. Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something had been overlooked, something hidden in plain sight. The thought nagged at him relentlessly, refusing to let him rest. He wasn't ready to surrender, not yet. As Ranger curled at his feet, Michael promised himself that tomorrow would be different. Somehow he would push past the dead ends. Because giving up wasn't an option, not for him and not for the children who still needed to be found. It was late in the afternoon when Michael and Ranger drove along a stretch of farmland on the edge of the county, land most people forgot even existed. The fields were overgrown, fences leaning under the weight of time, and barns sagged like tired giants. Michael had no particular lead that day, just a gut feeling, an itch that wouldn't let him rest. Ranger sat alert in the passenger seat, his ears pricked forward. Suddenly the dog growled low in his throat, staring toward a section of property fenced off with rusted wire. Michael slowed the car. "What is it, boy?" Ranger pressed his nose to the glass, tail stiff. Michael pulled over and stepped out. The late summer air was heavy with the smell of weeds and dust. The land stretched wide and silent, but in the middle of it, half hidden by tall grass, was an old stone well. Its cover was broken, boards splintered and scattered like discarded bones. Michael felt a chill despite the heat. He'd heard stories about places like this, the kind of local tales whispered by old-timers at diners and gas stations. People said kids used to dare each other to get close, that more than one farmhand had been injured or worse. It was one of those places where superstition clung like cobwebs. He shook his head, trying to dismiss the uneasy feeling creeping up his spine. "Just another ruin," he muttered. But Ranger wasn't convinced. The dog pulled hard on the leash, barking sharply as he lunged toward the well. "Easy, Ranger." Michael tightened his grip, but the German shepherd's intensity only grew. He circled the well, nose pressed to the ground, barking louder with each pass. Michael crouched, brushing away weeds to get a better look at the structure. The stones were cracked, and dark moss clung to their edges. A faint draft rose from inside, carrying with it a smell he couldn't quite place, damp earth mixed with something sharper, something out of place. "Sheriff's not going to like me poking around here," Michael muttered. But Ranger barked again, insistent. Behind him, a voice called out, "How you don't want to mess with that land, Harris?" Michael turned to see Tom Bowers, a farmer from down the road, leaning on the fence. His face was weathered, his hat pulled low against the sun. "That well's bad news. My daddy told me stories, said folks got hurt down there when he was a kid. Nothing but trouble ever came from it." Michael walked over, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You ever hear about kids playing around here recently?" Tom shook his head. "No one comes near, not unless they're looking for trouble. Best to leave it be." Michael studied him for a moment, then glanced back at Ranger, who was still pacing furiously. The unease in his chest deepened. He'd learned long ago to trust Ranger's instincts. The dog didn't waste energy on ghosts. "Thanks, Tom," Michael said, though his mind was already elsewhere. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the grass, Michael stood by the edge of the well, listening. Ranger whined softly, tail wagging with nervous energy. Michael leaned closer. For a moment he thought he heard something faint, almost like an echo far below. He straightened quickly, heart thudding. Maybe it was nothing, just the wind rushing through stone. But maybe, it was something more. Driving back that evening, Michael couldn't shake the image of Ranger barking at the well, nor the strange sound that seemed to rise from its depths. He didn't have proof, not yet, but for the first time in weeks he felt the faint stir of something he hadn't dared hold on to. Possibility. And possibility was enough to keep him from surrendering to despair. The storm had rolled in quickly, sweeping across the flat plains with a fury that rattled windows and bent trees. Rain hammered the patrol car as Michael steered down the lonely road, his wipers struggling to keep pace. Ranger shifted restlessly in the seat beside him, ears flicking with each rumble of thunder. The dog's agitation had started hours earlier, and Michael could tell it wasn't the weather that had him unsettled. By the time they reached the farmland, night had fallen. Lightning flashed, illuminating the sagging fences and tall grass, and in those brief bursts of light, Michael saw Ranger's head whip toward the well. Without hesitation, the dog lunged against the door, barking with a desperate urgency that startled Michael. "Ranger, hold on," Michael called, but the German shepherd burst free the moment the door opened, racing into the storm. His dark coat blurred against the rain as he sprinted across the field, paws splashing through puddles until he reached the well. Without waiting for command, Ranger leapt over the broken boards and disappeared inside. Michael's heart slammed in his chest. "No!" he shouted, tearing across the muddy ground. His boots slipped on the slick grass, and cold rain stung his face, but he didn't stop until he reached the jagged edge. Peering down, he expected silence, maybe the echo of paws scrambling against stone. Instead, what reached him froze him where he stood. Barking. Fierce, echoing barks reverberated upward, but woven between them was something else, faint, fragile, almost drowned out by the storm. Voices. Michael gripped the edge of the well, straining to hear. He shut his eyes, forcing himself to focus. Beneath the sound of rain, beneath Ranger's insistent bark, he heard it clearly, the tremble of a child's cry. The realization stole his breath. He stumbled back, staring into the darkness below. For weeks, the town had been suffocating under hopelessness, officials ready to declare the children lost forever. But here, in the hollow belly of forgotten farmland, voices still called out. Michael leaned forward again, shouting into the depths. "Hello, this is Officer Harris. Can you hear me?" For a moment there was nothing but the storm. Then a weak, trembling voice floated upward. "Help. Please." Michael's throat tightened. He wanted to believe his ears, but his training reminded him of caution. Yet Ranger's relentless barking told him this was no illusion. The dog never betrayed trust with false alarms. Michael pulled his flashlight from his belt, angling the beam into the black. The light barely penetrated, only catching the crumbling stone walls and slick moss. He swallowed hard, rain dripping from his chin. "Hang on down there, we'll get you out!" A flash of lightning split the sky, thunder booming so loud it rattled Michael's chest. He looked toward the road, half expecting to see headlights, backup, a rescue team, someone else to share the weight of this discovery. But there was only darkness and rain. His radio crackled weakly, static drowning out any hope of a clear call. The storm had cut them off. For the first time in weeks, Michael wasn't surrounded by reporters, sheriffs, or committees. Just him, his dog, and the voices of children buried below. He pressed a shaking hand against the edge of the well, staring into the abyss. The fear of collapse, of not knowing what lay beneath, gnawed at him, but beneath the fear was something stronger, something that burned in his chest like a promise. The children were alive, and if they were alive, he would not leave them there. As rain poured harder, Michael drew in a deep breath, whispering to himself, "This is it. This is the break we've been waiting for." Ranger barked again from below, sharp and demanding. Michael clenched his jaw, determination hardening inside him. Somehow, some way, he would follow that bark into the depths. Michael didn't sleep that night. Even after the storm eased, he sat by his kitchen table, the sound of rain dripping from the gutters echoing in his ears. His hands trembled slightly as he replayed the faint voices rising from the well. Each whisper, each cry, clawed at his conscience. He had proof now, proof that the children were alive. But proof wasn't enough. He needed a plan. By sunrise, Michael was back at the sheriff's office. Sheriff Laura McKinney listened with arms crossed, her eyes sharp with both caution and fatigue. "You're telling me you heard children in that well?" she asked, her voice steady but skeptical. "I didn't just hear them. Ranger found them," Michael replied firmly. "He wouldn't be that relentless if there wasn't something down there." "I'm telling you, Sheriff, they're alive." The room was silent for a beat. Deputies exchanged doubtful glances. One finally muttered, "That well's been condemned for decades. You go down there, the whole thing might collapse on you." Michael leaned forward, his tone unyielding. "If there's even a chance those kids are down there, we can't ignore it." "I'm not asking, I'm telling you this is where the trail leads." Sheriff McKinney rubbed her forehead, then sighed. "I'll authorize a controlled investigation. But listen to me, Harris. No heroics. We don't know how deep it goes, what condition the tunnels are in. You put one foot wrong, you're dead, and so is your dog." Michael nodded, though his jaw was tight. "Understood." By mid-morning, a small group assembled at the site. Deputies, a local firefighter crew, and a rescue specialist from the county. The air smelled of wet earth and gasoline from the trucks idling nearby. Ropes, harnesses, and lights were laid out, but hesitation lingered among the men. "This thing isn't stable," the firefighter captain warned, crouching near the edge. He kicked at the crumbling stone, which broke loose with unsettling ease. "We tried to lower anyone down, it could give way." Michael crouched beside Ranger, who sat steady despite the tension, eyes locked on the well as if he could still hear the voices below. Michael ran a hand down his back. "We don't have time to debate," he said, voice low but firm. "Every minute matters." Karen Thompson arrived unexpectedly, clutching a photograph of her missing son. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with determination. She approached Michael directly. "You told me you wouldn't stop. Tell me now, are they down there?" Michael hesitated, then met her gaze. "I believe they are." "I can't promise, but I swear to you, Karen, I'll do everything to bring them out." Tears welled in her eyes. She nodded, gripping his arm briefly before stepping back. The rescue specialist cleared his throat. "We can lower a camera first. See what we're dealing with before sending a man in." Michael shook his head. "We don't need a camera, we need action. Ranger already made contact." "I'm going down there with him." The group erupted with protests. "That's reckless. You'll get yourself killed. Wait for proper equipment." But Michael stood his ground. "I know the risks, but I also know that if we waste more time, those kids might not make it. I trust Ranger more than any piece of machinery. He'll guide me." Sheriff McKinney's eyes locked on his, weighing his resolve. Finally, she exhaled slowly. "Fine. You get one chance, Harris. You go down, you check it out, and you come back up alive. Do not play the martyr." Michael clipped Ranger's harness, his voice steady as he whispered, "Ready, partner?" The dog gave a sharp bark in response, muscles tense with anticipation. As the ropes were secured and the first preparations began, Michael felt the weight of the entire town pressing on his shoulders. This wasn't just another search, it was the turning point. Either he would return with hope, or the well would swallow him whole. The rope creaked as Michael descended, his boots scraping against the damp stone wall. Cold air rose from below, carrying the scent of earth and mildew. Drops of water trickled down the sides, landing on his shoulders as he steadied himself. Ranger had been lowered first in a harness, and now the dog's sharp barks echoed faintly, guiding Michael down into the darkness. When his boots finally touched solid ground, Michael unclipped himself quickly and clicked on his flashlight. The beam cut through the shadows, revealing a narrow chamber with slick stone walls and a floor of packed dirt. Ranger stood at the far end, ears alert, nose pressed against a jagged opening in the wall. Michael crouched beside him. The opening wasn't part of the original well. It looked like a break, an unnatural split in the earth. Edges of brick and rotted wood hinted at construction long forgotten. He leaned closer, brushing his hand over the damp surface. "Tunnels," he muttered under his breath. "This isn't just a well." Ranger barked once, then pushed forward, squeezing through the narrow gap. Michael followed carefully, the passage tight enough that he had to turn sideways in places. His flashlight beam flickered against old support beams, blackened with rot, and faint carvings etched into the stone, remnants of hands that had once built and used this place. The deeper they went, the clearer the signs became. A child's shoe lay half buried in the dirt, its fabric worn and muddy. Candy wrappers, torn and faded, were scattered nearby. Michael's pulse quickened as he knelt to pick one up. The brand was recent, the kind sold in the corner store downtown. "They were here," he whispered, his throat tight. His flashlight shook slightly in his hand. Further in, he spotted scratches along the stone walls, marks too small to be from tools. He reached out, tracing the grooves with his fingertips. Fingernails. Children had clawed at the walls, desperate to leave some trace of themselves. The weight of it pressed hard against his chest, but Ranger's low growl snapped him back to focus. "Easy, boy," Michael said softly, raising the light toward where the dog was staring. Ahead, the tunnel widened into a chamber, and along its edge were makeshift bedding piles, old blankets, cardboard, and rags. He crouched low, scanning the ground. There were footprints unmistakable in the dirt, small, uneven, frantic. Michael's voice cracked as he spoke aloud, though no one was there to hear it. "God, they've been living down here." The realization made his stomach churn. This wasn't an accident, not some children lost in the dark. Someone had put them here. Someone had used these forgotten tunnels, built long ago and left to rot as a hiding place. Ranger moved forward again, tail stiff, nose darting left and right as he tracked. Michael followed closely, the air growing heavier with each step. The silence pressed in, broken only by the faint drip of water echoing in the distance. He felt as though the tunnels themselves were holding secrets, waiting to crush him if he lingered too long. At one point, the passage split in two directions. Michael paused, shining his light both ways. One path sloped upward, blocked partially by collapsed beams. The other stretched deeper, vanishing into darkness. Ranger sniffed both, then growled and stepped toward the deeper tunnel without hesitation. Michael tightened his grip on the flashlight, forcing calm into his voice. "All right, Ranger, lead the way." As they pressed on, Michael's mind swirled with questions. Who had built these tunnels? Why here, beneath farmland forgotten by most? And most importantly, if the children were kept alive in this place, who had brought them here? Each step seemed to pull him closer to answers, but also closer to danger. He could feel it in the air, thick and suffocating. Still, he followed Ranger deeper, knowing the truth lay somewhere ahead. The tunnel stretched farther than Michael had expected, the air growing colder, and the walls narrowing until every breath echoed like a confession. Ranger padded ahead, tail stiff, nose low to the ground. The beam of Michael's flashlight wavered across the dirt floor and then froze on something that made his stomach twist, a rusted metal cot. Beside it, a heap of blankets, dirty and torn, reeking of sweat and mildew. Plastic bottles half filled with stagnant water lay scattered nearby. He crouched, his fingers brushing over the thin mattress, and the realization hit hard. These weren't remnants of long-abandoned use. Someone had been here recently. Children had been here recently. Ranger growled low, his body tense. Michael's light swept further. Against the wall sat wooden crates, lids pried open. Inside, neatly stacked supplies. Canned food, boxes of crackers, bottled water. Someone had stocked this place deliberately, preparing it to keep people alive. Michael whispered more to himself than anyone else. This isn't just hiding. This is planned. He checked the ground again and saw more footprints, small, overlapping, pressed deep into the dirt. Fear and anger warred inside him. The children weren't lost by accident. They had been taken, corralled, and hidden in a place designed for secrecy. As his pulse pounded, he heard the faint scrape of metal against stone. He swung his flashlight toward the sound. A corner of the chamber revealed something worse. Chains bolted into the wall, restraints dangling like cruel reminders. His throat tightened. Whoever had done this had no intention of letting those kids go free. Michael clenched his jaw, whispering to Ranger, "We're dealing with more than a missing persons case. This is organized." The dog's ears perked, nose twitching as if confirming his thought. Michael knew he had to bring this information back to the surface, but his instincts screamed that leaving now could risk losing the trail. He pressed on, each step heavy with the weight of what he was uncovering. The tunnel opened again, leading into another chamber. There he found evidence even more damning. Notebooks filled with scribbles, maps of county roads marked with red X's, and lists of names. Michael flipped through the pages, his hands trembling. These weren't random abductions. They had been tracking children, selecting them, planning their movements. A sharp pain pressed against his chest as he imagined the families upstairs praying, pleading for hope, while down here their worst nightmares had been systematically carried out. Suddenly, Ranger barked sharply, pulling Michael from his thoughts. The dog's body stiffened, ears angled toward the far end of the chamber. Michael killed his flashlight instinctively, plunging the space into near darkness. In the silence, he heard it. Footsteps, faint but distinct, moving somewhere beyond the wall. His heart slammed against his ribs. He wasn't alone down here. Michael's grip tightened on his flashlight, his mind racing. He crouched low, whispering, "Stay close, Ranger." The dog pressed against his leg, silent now, muscles taut like a coiled spring. The footsteps faded after a moment, replaced by the distant creak of wood. Whoever was here had slipped away into another section of the tunnels. Michael exhaled slowly, forcing his pulse to calm. He needed backup. This operation was bigger than anything the county had faced. Still, leaving without marking the path felt like betrayal. He pulled a piece of chalk from his pocket, something he always carried during searches, and made a discreet mark on the wall. Then he whispered to Ranger, "We'll be back. We're not done." As he made his way back toward the rope, every detail etched itself into his memory. The chains, the food crates, the notebooks. This was no longer about hope alone. It was about dismantling something monstrous. And Michael knew the battle had only just begun. The next descent into the tunnels felt heavier, as if the air itself carried the weight of all the unanswered prayers from above. This time, Michael wasn't just following Ranger's instincts. He carried the knowledge of what he had seen. The cots, the chains, the maps. Proof that the nightmare was real. And still, the faint hope of voices haunted him. As he moved deeper, Ranger's nose pressed close to the ground, tail wagging in short, tense bursts. The dog's posture was different now, not just searching, but guiding with certainty. Michael's flashlight illuminated scuffed walls and the same trail of candy wrappers. Then suddenly Ranger froze, ears rigid. He gave a sharp bark, then another, before bolting into a side passage. "Ranger, wait!" Michael hissed, but followed quickly. His boots splashed through shallow puddles, light bouncing wildly against the walls, and then the beam landed on a sight that made his throat close. Huddled together in a corner of a small chamber were children, 14 of them. Their clothes were torn, faces pale, eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. Some blinked against the light. Others clutched one another tightly, as if afraid to believe rescue had come. For a moment, Michael couldn't speak. The sight of so many young faces, still alive after all these weeks, struck him like a wave. His knees felt weak, but Ranger surged forward, barking joyfully, tail wagging hard. The children's fear cracked just slightly as the dog pressed against them, letting small hands cling to his fur. One boy, no older than 10, whispered hoarsely, "Is he here to help us?" Michael found his voice. "Yes, my name is Officer Harris. This is Ranger. You're safe now. We're going to get you out." The chamber filled with soft sobs, relief mixing with disbelief. A girl around 12 looked at him with trembling lips. "We thought no one was coming." Michael knelt, lowering the beam of his flashlight so it wouldn't blind them. His voice softened. "We never stopped looking. Your families are waiting for you." Among the children, Michael recognized Adam Thompson, Karen's boy. The boy's eyes widened as he whispered, "I know you. You came to church with my mum once." Michael nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "That's right, she's been fighting for you every day. She never gave up." Adam pressed his face against Ranger's fur, shoulders shaking as silent tears finally fell. Michael quickly scanned the chamber. There was no food left, only empty cans and scraps, signs the captors hadn't returned recently. The children were weak but alive, and that meant time was running dangerously short. He clicked his radio, but only static answered. Underground, the storm's damage had cut off the signal completely. For now, it was just him and Ranger. He knew he had to keep them calm, keep them together. "Listen to me," he said firmly, addressing them all. "I need you to stay quiet and stay close. We're going to move carefully. Ranger will guide us, and I'll get you out one by one if I have to, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" A chorus of faint nods followed. The youngest, a little girl with tangled blonde hair, whispered, "Will it be dark the whole way?" Michael leaned closer, offering her a reassuring smile. "It'll be dark, but Ranger doesn't get scared of the dark. He'll be right beside you the whole time." The girl reached out, gripping his sleeve tightly. Her small hand trembled, but Michael covered it with his own, steadying her. For the first time in weeks, the case wasn't about theories, suspicions, or blind searching. The children were here, alive, waiting to be saved. But as Michael glanced back toward the twisting tunnels, he knew the hardest part had only begun. Michael steadied his breathing, forcing himself to focus. The children were staring at him, clinging to every word, every movement, desperate for direction. Panic would spread quickly if he let his own fear show. He crouched low, meeting their wide eyes. "We're getting out of here," he said firmly. "But we'll have to move carefully. These tunnels aren't safe and we don't have much time." Ranger barked once, the sharp sound cutting through the tension. The children seemed to draw strength from it, their faces softening slightly. Michael placed a hand on the dog's back. "He's going to lead us. If you feel scared, keep your hand on Ranger or on the person in front of you. No one walks alone." A boy with dirt-streaked cheeks raised his hand timidly. "What if the bad men come back?" Michael's jaw tightened. "If they do, Ranger and I will handle it. Your only job is to stay quiet and follow instructions. Understand?" The boy nodded, swallowing hard. Michael moved to the tunnel entrance and tested the air with his flashlight. Dust swirled in the beam, and the ground looked unstable. He traced the route in his mind: tight passages, low ceilings, sections that could collapse at the wrong touch. He would have to bring them out slowly, in groups, and pray the structure held long enough. He turned back to the oldest of the group, a girl around 14 with steady eyes. "What's your name?" "Leah," she answered quietly. "You're going to help me," Michael said. "You stay near the back and keep everyone moving. If anyone falls behind, you tell me immediately. Can you do that?" Leah straightened, a flicker of determination replacing her fear. "Yes, sir." Michael gave her a brief nod, then reached into his belt pouch. He pulled out a roll of fluorescent tape, tearing strips and placing one on each child's sleeve. "This will help me keep track of you in the dark," he explained. "No one takes it off." As he worked, Adam Thompson spoke up, his voice trembling. "My mom. She'll know I'm okay, right?" Michael paused, looking him in the eye. "She never stopped believing in you. When we get out, you'll see her waiting." Adam's lip quivered, but he nodded firmly, holding Ranger's fur for comfort. Once every child was marked and accounted for, Michael checked his watch. The battery ticked faintly in the silence, reminding him how precious every minute was. "All right," he said finally. "We move in pairs. Ranger leads. I'll stay close to the front. Leah, you bring up the rear. No talking unless it's important." The children shuffled nervously, their bare feet scraping against the dirt. Michael gestured for the first two to follow. Ranger stepped forward confidently, sniffing the path, barking softly when the group hesitated. His presence was a steadying force, a guide they could trust even when Michael's words weren't enough. As they began to move, Michael whispered encouragements. "You're doing good. Keep close." "Watch your step." The youngest clung tightly to his sleeve, her tiny fingers trembling but determined. Each step forward carried risk. The tunnels groaned faintly, small bits of dirt sifting from above. Michael's eyes darted constantly, assessing the structure, judging whether it would hold. He had walked into danger many times before, but never with so many fragile lives depending on him. Halfway down the passage, a sudden rumble made the walls shudder. The children froze, whimpering in fear. Michael raised a hand quickly. "Don't move. Stay calm." Dust fell in thin streams from the ceiling. Ranger growled low, positioning himself between the children and the trembling wall. The rumble faded. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael swallowed hard, whispering, "We keep going. Slowly now, one step at a time." The children obeyed, their small figures moving like shadows in the beam of his flashlight. Every second was a battle between fear and resolve. But as Michael watched them follow Ranger with unwavering trust, he felt a flicker of hope. The way out was long and dangerous, but for the first time they were no longer lost. They were on their way home. The tunnel groaned like a living creature, every sound amplified in the silence. Michael moved carefully, guiding the children one step at a time, but the weight of the earth above pressed heavy on his chest. Ranger trotted ahead, ears flicking back and forth, every muscle alert. The children clung to one another, their breaths quick and shallow. They had made it halfway toward the well when the ground trembled violently. A deep rumble shook through the passage, and then, with a deafening crack, part of the ceiling gave way. Dirt and stone crashed down in a choking cloud. The children screamed, stumbling backward, and Michael threw himself forward, shielding two nearest to him. "Stay down," he barked, his voice hoarse. Dust filled his lungs as he pulled the children against his chest. Ranger barked furiously, circling the group as debris rained from above. The collapse lasted only seconds, but when it ended, the tunnel was unrecognizable. A thick wall of rubble blocked the path they had been taking. Michael coughed hard, forcing air into his lungs, then checked the children pressed against him. Both were shaken but alive. He brushed dirt from their hair, whispering, "You're okay, I've got you." Behind him, frightened voices rose. "We're trapped," one child cried. Another clutched Leah's arm, sobbing uncontrollably. Michael forced himself upright, ignoring the sting in his shoulder where a rock had struck him. His flashlight beam caught the dust swirling in the air, then landed on the pile of collapsed stone. The passage forward was sealed. For a moment, dread clamped down on him. This could be the end of their escape. Ranger, however, didn't hesitate. The dog lunged at the rubble, digging with frantic paws, growling as if the earth itself were his enemy. Dirt flew in all directions as he clawed at the debris. Michael dropped to his knees beside him, his voice tight. "That's it, Ranger. Find us a way." The children watched, their fear momentarily replaced with fragile hope as Ranger kept digging. Michael joined in, pulling rocks loose with bleeding hands, ignoring the pain. He spoke through clenched teeth, more to keep them calm than anything else. "This wall isn't stopping us, we've come too far." Minutes dragged by, every second suffocating. The air grew thick with dust, and some of the younger ones began coughing. Michael's heart hammered. He knew the structure could collapse further, but there was no choice. They had to push through. At last, Ranger's bark cut through the darkness. His nose pressed into a narrow gap where air rushed faintly. Michael shoved his flashlight inside, seeing the faint glimmer of open space beyond. Relief surged through him. "We've got an opening," he announced, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "It's tight, but we'll make it." Leah stepped forward, her face pale but resolute. "The kids can go first. I'll help keep them calm." Michael nodded firmly. "Good, one at a time, nice and slow." He guided the first child through, squeezing them past the jagged stones, while Ranger barked encouragement from the other side. Michael whispered reassurance with each step. "You're almost there. Keep moving. You're safe." As more children passed through the gap, Michael's muscles ached, his breath coming in ragged bursts. Dust stung his eyes, but he refused to stop. The children's lives depended on him holding steady. Finally, as the last few squeezed through, the ground shivered again. Michael's heart clenched. He shoved two children forward, bracing his back against the unstable wall as rocks shifted dangerously above. "Go, don't look back," Ranger barked frantically from the other side, refusing to leave. Michael grit his teeth, whispering under his breath, "Not yet, not while they still need me." The earth groaned again, louder this time, as if threatening to bury them all. Michael knew the fight wasn't over. The escape was only beginning. The children stumbled through the narrow gap one after another, their small bodies scraping against stone as Michael urged them forward. Dust clung to their hair, their faces streaked with tears and dirt. But each one that reached Ranger on the other side filled Michael with renewed strength. He counted them obsessively, whispering their names as they crawled into safety. 13, he muttered, his voice hoarse. His flashlight beam swept over the chamber again, making sure no one had been left behind. That was when his stomach dropped. In the far corner, barely visible behind a pile of debris, a boy sat curled tightly, arms wrapped around his knees. His eyes shone wide in the dim light, terrified, frozen in place. Michael's chest clenched. "Son," he called gently, crouching low. "It's safe now. You need to come with me." The boy shook his head violently, pressing back against the wall. "It'll fall," he whispered. His voice was thin, broken. "If I move, it'll all fall." Michael's heart ached at the raw fear in his words. He inched closer, careful not to make sudden movements. "Listen to me. My name is Officer Harris. I've already got the others through. You're the last one. We can't leave you here." The boy's breathing quickened, shallow gasps echoing in the chamber. "They said no one would come. They said if I left, I'd never see my mom again." Michael's jaw tightened. Whoever had told this child those words had poisoned him with despair. He forced his voice to steady calm. "They were wrong. Your mom's waiting for you. She never stopped praying you'd come home." For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then Ranger barked from the other side of the rubble, sharp and insistent. The boy's head lifted, eyes darting toward the sound. "You hear that?" Michael asked softly. "That's Ranger. He's not leaving without you. None of us are." The boy hesitated, trembling. Michael extended his hand, palm open. "I'll be right here. You don't have to be brave alone. Just take my hand." Slowly, painfully, the boy began to uncurl. His small fingers reached out, brushing against Michael's. The officer closed his hand gently around them, warmth cutting through the chill of the tunnel. "That's it," Michael encouraged, keeping his voice steady even as rocks shifted above them with a low groan. "Step by step. We'll go together." The boy stumbled forward, and Michael guided him quickly toward the opening. Ranger barked again, louder this time, clawing at the dirt to widen the gap. The boy flinched at the sound of more debris falling, but Michael tightened his grip. "Don't look up, just keep moving, almost there." As they reached the narrow space, Michael pushed the boy ahead of him, shielding his small frame with his own body. Stones scraped against Michael's shoulders, sharp edges tearing into his uniform. He gritted his teeth, ignoring the pain, forcing the boy through inch by inch until Ranger's strong jaws caught hold of the boy's sleeve and tugged him into the other side. The boy cried out, then collapsed into Ranger's fur, sobbing with relief. Michael exhaled a shuddering breath, his arms trembling from the effort. He started to push himself through when the tunnel gave another violent shudder. Dirt rained down, and Michael knew the structure was seconds away from collapse. "Go!" he shouted hoarsely, shoving the last of the rubble behind him. Ranger barked frantically, refusing to move back until Michael emerged. With one final heave, he pulled himself through, landing hard on the ground beside the children. They were all there, 14, every single one. Michael's chest heaved as he looked at their frightened but living faces. For the first time since the nightmare began, hope wasn't a fragile whisper. It was real, tangible, and clinging to him with desperate hands. But as the rumble of collapsing stone echoed behind them, he knew their fight for survival was not over yet. The night air hit Michael like a blessing when he finally climbed out of the well. His chest heaved as he pulled himself onto solid ground. The children gathered behind him, clinging to one another beneath blankets, hurriedly provided by first responders. Flashing lights bathed the farmland in blue and red, and the sound of radios crackling mixed with cries of relief. Parents rushed forward, some collapsing to their knees as they embraced their children. Karen Thompson was among them. She caught sight of Adam and let out a raw, broken cry. He ran into her arms, sobbing into her shoulder as she held him like she would never let go again. Between tears, she mouthed 2 words to Michael across the crowd. "Thank you." Sheriff McKinney stood nearby, her usual composed demeanor cracked by the sight before her. She touched Michael's arm quietly. "You did it," she said, her voice husky. "You brought them back." Michael shook his head, glancing at Ranger, who sat proudly at his side, tongue lolling, eyes bright with purpose. "We did it," he corrected. But joy mingled with grim reality. Agents in plain jackets moved through the crowd, carrying folders and speaking in hushed tones. The FBI had already begun treating the tunnels as a crime scene, gathering evidence of what Michael had discovered. Maps, lists, chains, supplies. It wasn't the work of a lone kidnapper. It was organized, systematic, and calculated. Later that night, Michael sat across from Agent Ramirez inside the sheriff's office. The agent flipped through photographs taken underground. This wasn't just a hiding spot. These tunnels were part of a larger network. We've seen similar patterns in other states. Rural areas, abandoned structures, places where people don't look twice. Michael's stomach churned as he stared at the images. So this wasn't random, Ramirez shook his head. No. Someone was using this place as part of a trafficking route. The children were being held here temporarily. If you hadn't found them when you did. He let the words hang, the implication heavy. Michael rubbed his temples, exhaustion crashing over him. Then we stopped them, at least this time. Ramirez leaned forward. And you gave us a lead. We'll follow it. His eyes softened briefly. You and that dog of yours saved 14 lives tonight. That's no small thing. Outside the office, families lingered, unwilling to leave each other's side. The church bells rang in the distance, not for mourning this time, but for gratitude. Pastor Samuel gathered parents together, leading them in a prayer of thanksgiving that carried across the quiet streets. Michael stood at the doorway, watching. He didn't join, but the sound eased something inside him. He looked down at Ranger, who sat pressed against his leg. We did right, partner, he whispered. Ranger gave a soft whine, leaning into him as if he understood. The following days brought waves of justice. Several arrests were made in neighboring counties, men tied to the tunnels and the operation that had plagued the community. Trucks loaded with confiscated supplies were hauled away, their contents catalogued as evidence. Though many questions remained unanswered, who had orchestrated it, how deep it went, one truth stood clear: the children were home. In the midst of the chaos, Michael finally found a quiet moment with his daughter Emily, who had flown in with her mother after hearing the news. She looked at him differently now, not with the usual distance, but with something closer to pride. I saw you on the news, she said softly. They called you a hero. Michael shook his head, smiling faintly. Heroes don't work alone. Ranger deserves more of the credit. Emily knelt, scratching behind the dog's ears. Maybe so. But I think you showed me why you could never give up this job. She glanced up at him. You saved them, Dad. That matters. For the first time in years, Michael felt a bridge forming between them. Fragile but real. He rested a hand on her shoulder, realizing that saving others had also brought him closer to saving himself. The town would never forget the fear, but it would also never forget the night hope returned. In the days that followed, the small Kansas town transformed. Where silence and grief had once hung heavy, laughter began to return. Parents walked hand in hand with their children through Main Street, unwilling to let them out of sight. Porch lights that had been left burning in vigil were finally turned off, their glow no longer a desperate signal of hope, but a quiet sign of peace. For Michael, the weight of the ordeal lingered in quieter ways. He found himself waking in the middle of the night, hearing echoes of voices in his dreams. But each time Ranger was there, nudging him gently, grounding him in the present. The sight of the children alive and safe replayed in his mind, steadying him when doubts threatened to creep back in. One evening, Michael visited Karen Thompson at her home. She answered the door with Adam at her side, his face brighter than Michael had ever seen it. Karen's eyes filled with tears as she reached for Michael's hand. I don't have words big enough for what you did, she said softly. You don't need them, Michael replied. He looked down at Adam, who clutched Ranger's neck affectionately. Seeing him home is enough. Karen smiled faintly. The whole town owes you, but I think I owe you most of all. Michael didn't argue. Some debts couldn't be measured in words or gestures, only in the silent gratitude that passed between a mother and the man who had returned her child. The sheriff organized a gathering in the town square a week later. Families crowded the space, children on shoulders, flags waving gently in the breeze. Sheriff McKinney took the podium, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Tonight we're not here to dwell on what we've lost," she said. "We're here to celebrate what we've regained. 14 children returned to their families, and it wouldn't have been possible without one man and his dog." The crowd erupted in applause as Michael and Ranger were called forward. Michael felt uncomfortable under the weight of so many eyes, but Ranger stood tall, soaking in the cheers as if he understood every ounce of their meaning. Michael leaned down, whispering, "Guess you're the star of the show, huh?" Ranger barked once, tail wagging, earning a chorus of laughter from the children nearby. When the applause settled, Michael spoke briefly, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm no hero, I just refuse to give up. Ranger refused too. If there's one thing I hope you take from this, it's that even when things look impossible, you keep searching, you keep fighting, because sometimes hope is buried, but it's never gone." His words settled over the crowd, carried by the wind like a promise. Later that night, Michael sat on his porch with his daughter Emily. The stars stretched wide above them, clear and bright. Emily leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "You really did it, Dad," she whispered. He shook his head softly. "We did it, Ranger and I." She smiled, her voice warm. "I'm proud of you." Michael swallowed hard, emotion tightening his chest. For years he had longed to hear those words. Now with his daughter beside him and Ranger stretched at his feet, he finally felt whole. The bond between man and dog, between a father and daughter, between a town and its children, it all wove together into something stronger than fear. Something that proved light could be found even in the darkest places. Before we close this story, don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories that show the strength of courage, loyalty, and hope. And make sure to click the suggested video on your screen to keep following powerful journeys like this one. Because sometimes all it takes to change the world is refusing to give up, no matter how deep the darkness runs.